When people come into church, you often wonder, why do they look that way? I guess we kind of expect people to look a certain way, don't we? Over the years, we've kind of got this idea in our mind that you wear your Sunday best, which usually means a tie and a suit. I remember as a little child, we used to get ready in the morning, and our shoes were laid out. And there was a pair of shoes that we wore that was only used for Sunday school and for church. And of course, those are days gone by. Nobody does that anymore. But a lot of times when we do come into a local church, we look around and we check people out. And we sometimes evaluate whether or not they're successful based on the car that they drove into the parking lot, or maybe by the way they appear, the latest style or label of designer clothes. But really, what does God look at? What does God look for? I think when we come into church, God looks at the heart. As a matter of fact, in 1 Samuel, that's exactly what the Bible says, that God looks at the heart, but man looks at the outward appearance. And that means that when you go to the house of God, when you go to church, when you come into a place of worship, that we should not be looking at the people's exterior as much as we should be looking at the heart. And sometimes we judge people. We judge especially the younger generation because they have a particular style, their customary way of just dressing, and their identity, whether that be in the clothing that they wear, or perhaps the tattoos or the piercings or the hairstyles. And often that can become a difficult thing to overcome by some of the more established members of the local church. And I think that's why today a lot of people looked at the church and thought, you know what, I don't need it. I don't need the judgment. I don't need the hypocrisy. I don't need people coming in there and telling me what I should be doing and how I should be looking. And I just want you to know something about Church on the North Coast, right here in Lorain, Ohio, and also in Beechwood, Ohio, which is our new location just off 271 in Chagrin. We meet at the Embassy Suites, and it's really kind of neat because it's so non-traditional. There's no church there. It's a ballroom, and we turn it into a church. As a matter of fact, when the people gather, that's what makes it a church. A building isn't a church. We've got to begin to kind of dismiss some of these traditional ideologies about what church is all about. And so today we can come into the presence of God. We can enjoy the presence of the Lord and one another just the way we are. And God is a God of the heart. And I think if we can begin to communicate this to this generation, to let them know that you don't have to fulfill a set of rules or you don't have to jump through the hoops of expectation, then maybe they'd be more apt to come. And I want to invite you to come, not to church, but to come to Christ. Come to God and say, Lord, just the way I am. Maybe you're not refined enough. Maybe you've been through some stuff. Maybe you've got some things going on in your life right now that you're not proud of. And don't we all? But you know, the Lord understands that too. And there was a woman that came into the presence of Jesus one day. There was a bunch of religious people that had sat down to have dinner with him. He walked in and sat down and wasn't even greeted. You know, it was customary that when you brought somebody into your home as a guest, you'd wash their feet and you'd, provide them with some kind of like aftershave, perfume, if you will, and have them sit down in a comfortable seat. And they didn't do that to Jesus. And he was the guest of honor. Think about that. And then all of a sudden this woman comes in. Her name was Mary. She came walking in. Now you can think about it as a dignified meeting, sort of like some dignitary that was there, a high-profile person. And she walks right in, begins weeping as she walks towards Jesus, kneels down in front of him, and begins to wash his feet with her tears. Wow, talk about contrition. Talk about loving the Lord with all your heart. That's exactly what she did. And the Bible said she began to wipe his feet with her hair. All of a sudden, everybody was making comments about, wow, does Jesus know who this woman is? You see, she was the town prostitute. She was the woman of the night. She was the woman that maybe some of these guys that were at this meeting had been with. I don't know if that was the case or not. It's sort of reading between the lines, but it could have been. And they knew who she was, and they said, well, if he only knew. Evidently, Jesus didn't know her that way. He knew her a different way. My question is, how do you know people? By what they do or by how God made them to be? And you're very special in the sight of God. And Jesus defended her because she poured out her very best to God. That's exactly what he's looking for. And I pray that today you'll pour your very best out for God. And stop stereotyping people. Stop judging people for their appearance. Start looking on the inner heart of a man and of a woman. Because that's exactly the way God looks at you and me.